Speaking of amazing, I've been really looking forward to this speaker. And as much as you guys are like, oh, is Rick really going to talk about U.S. history again? You got through that. So now to the good stuff. Steve Parlato of Middlebury is an educator, an artist, a poet. I met him when he did a presentation at the Woodbury Public Library a couple of months ago. I was so impressed, and you will see why I immediately said, Steve, can you come and talk to our group? So please welcome to Justice Southbury, Steve Parlato.
Woo! Yeah! Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you for being here for 227 consecutive Sundays. I think that's amazing. Am I not close enough?
Oh, is the mic?
No, Rick and I got distracted for 1 second. It was hard. Yeah. Well, looks like you're not paying attention.
Perfect timing.
Okay, we'll start again. So the Articles of Confederation. Please welcome Steve Parlato. Right into it.
Thank you. So I started to say how impressed I am with you all on your 227th consecutive Sunday. We have something in common. The artwork and the poetry that I'm presenting today began in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. I'm a member of a poetry group called Poets for the Planet, and a fellow member, Sue Ellen, is here. We write poetry in response to the climate crisis, and I had been saving household junk with the idea of making art that spoke to the climate. And after George Floyd's murder, I decided to go in a different direction. I realized that it was Breonna Taylor's birthday, June 5th of 2020, and I created a portrait of her. That's the Breonna Taylor portrait on the far left. It's made using used wrapping paper, a brownie mix box, an artificial tears box, magazine pages, just stuff you would ordinarily throw in the recycling bin or in the garbage. And Rick mentioned that I am a poet. I've been writing a poem to accompany each of the portraits. There are 16 portraits in total. Each one has the first initial of the subject, and when you display them in the proper order, they spell out the declaration, Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to share some of the poems with you. There are 8 portraits here today. There's 4 on the other side of the sawhorses. I might spin them around at some point so you can see those. The first poem is the poem that I think of the opening poem of the collection. It's called Hosting the Stolen. Hosting the Stolen. For Brianna, Tamir, Cynthia, Rayshard, all the rest. Lacking the melanin required for membership, I have become host to meetings of the stolen. With no preset time or day, they come to me late and early, straight from drive-through lanes and snow-scudded city parks, from Bible circles, from sleep-tangled sheets, from family visits to the treacherous Jim Crow South. Navigating the fields of judgment, river of lies, they lined my squat couch to share their aspirations, their daily joys, daughter dancing, skittles and sweet tea, their undoings. Laying down the weapon of my whiteness, I follow each doomed soul into the reeds of sorrow, knowing I must emerge alone, must ready to welcome the next. So I should just introduce you, I suppose, to the 4. From left to right, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Elijah McClain, and Tatiana Hall. With the collection, I've tried to represent Black Americans. They're all Black Americans whose lives were stolen due to racial violence. But I've tried to show the diversity within that population, people of different ages, people from different points in history, different life experiences to kind of highlight what we lose when we lose not just one person, not just 8 people, not just 16, but countless people who have been lost to racial violence. The next poem is called Footprints in Snow, Elegy for Tamir Rice. In drifted fields, my mind spirals, leaping to that child's footprints in November snow, circling, labyrinthine as he ducks and points. Can you hear his laughter? A broken toy gun. Oh, to slow time, to halt the skidding cruiser, seize the fatal bullet from its chamber, freeze this moment in autumn ice. Oh, to rewind that day, back before the gazebo, before the blood, reroute his steps back to rec center potter's wheel, crochet table, to undo the fateful swap of phone for gun, to keep him safe. But being a boy and just 12, of course he answers the gun's siren call. Boys always, despite mother's warnings, answer. Once our son's friend Michael, barred from play weapons, gnawed his toast into a pistol, pointing, pow-powing it at breakfast. They praised him for resourcefulness, that blue-eyed, freckled boy. But this gone child, they say his blackness, his bigness at just 12, sealed his fate. They blame him for giving that white cop cause to shoot. I'm kind of assuming that you know most of the stories of the people that I've portrayed. Elijah McClain is another very well-known victim of police violence. The poem is titled Shelter Cats Mourn, and that is because Elijah volunteered at an animal shelter, playing his violin to calm the animals as they were brought in to the shelter. Shelter Cats Mourn for Elijah McClain. The old Abyssinian clears her throat. Her whiskers flick impatient as kittens dart weave in eager rows. They've coaxed her into sharing their favorite fable, the one about the black angel, and how he poured his music through cage mesh, his melodies kissing temple tufts, caressing silk backs, soft as gauze felt, mouse cheeks. His tunes were shields for strays' ears, softening the sharp buzz clank of armored doors, soothing the hissing mule of new arrivals. Too young, too new to have known his bright there-ness, they shiver still in his ever-absence, wondering at the cold silence of his lost violin. The fourth collage that is facing you is a portrait of Tatiana Hall, and she may be less well known than the first 3. Tatiana was a black trans woman, and as you probably know, violence against trans population, and particularly trans people of color, is at a catastrophic rate in this country. Tatiana's body was found on the street. No one was ever charged with her crime, probably in part because of lack of effort in finding the person who killed her. The poem is titled Of Boys and Beauty for Tatiana Hall. If butterflies could scream, I wonder, would boys still rip their wings off? Would they, laughing, grind iridescence between grimy fingers, appendage shreds dropping to dirt? Would they still savage milkweed, just to snatch a hidden chrysalis, smear it against asphalt, scorch it with sunlight through a polished bottle shard? When girls scream, Some boys will grin and slit open a cocoon, pinch its wriggling tenant, squish her in an eager fist, squelching beauty. Does beauty threaten these boys, frighten them? Does it echo the softness boys strive so hard to hide? For a time, one boy-raised child managed to mask softness in layers of swagger. But the tight-spun cocoon bruised more than those other boys' fists. Besides, beauty, insistent, always emerged in the swan neck, the arched brow, the love of purple, despite all efforts to suppress it. At last, shedding this cocoon, a new self emerged, a glint and gossamer, Tatiana. But her bright life was brief as a butterfly's. They found her, wings torn off, colors weeping onto blacktop. Entomologists claim that larvae feel no pain as their bodies digest themselves, that butterflies have no memory of their former self. So, at this juncture, I wonder if there are any questions or anything of that nature, or if I've sort of burnt you out on hearing poems. Jeremy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So all these are made from things like stuff you said that you found around, and I understand the symbolic meaning of that, but is there a specific meaning to the specific things you use for each person?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
You might want to repeat it just for us.
Yes, so Jeremy asked if there are specific materials that have relevance to the individual people that are included in the collages, and the answer is yes, on some level. I did try to incorporate materials that had some connection. So the portrait of Tamir Rice, for example, his shirt is made from a microwave popcorn box, and there are candy wrappers all throughout the background. I did a lot of walking during the beginning of the pandemic, and I was walking in a park near our home with my dog, and on the ground, maybe a few yards from a gazebo, I saw something glittering. And if you know Tamir's story, you know that he was killed very near a gazebo in a park. On the ground were these little metallic stars, like confetti stars that must have been from a birthday party or something, and I gathered a bunch of those and I incorporated them. I'm going to spin the sawhorses around carefully and show you the portraits on the other side, and I'll mention one of the items that's in one of those portraits.
Another question, Steve. The poems are very different, and like for instance, the last one was sort of extended metaphor. As you're reflecting on these and converting tragic deaths to art and to poetry, do you find that you more are looking for inspiration or finding inspiration? Like how does your creative process work?
You guys ask excellent questions. The poems are all different, and as I'm working on them, am I looking for inspiration? Am I finding inspiration? What is the process like? I think I sort of paraphrased that question. The poems are another kind of level of challenge, really. What I'm trying to do in the poems is not just sort of spotlight the horror of someone's death, but give some indication about their life and the potential that's lost. I tend to, in my poetry, work in syllabics, meaning that lines are a certain number of syllables. Some of them are in form, like some of them are loose sonnets. I don't tend to rhyme. I've done a lot of research on each of the people, and something will just hit me, I guess. The inspiration comes from details of their lives, and I try to incorporate that. I've written 12 poems so far. I originally was envisioning 18 poems, one for each of the people, and then an opening and closing poem. with the long-range goal of putting together a book of the images and the poetry and their stories, and using some of the proceeds from that book, should anyone buy it, to support equal justice. So I have 7 poems to go, and I now, once I complete the 7 are, for individual people for whom I haven't written poems. I have 1 extra poem, so it's going to end up being 19, or maybe it'll be 20, I don't know.
And the final poem is for Latasha Harlins. And we need to go back a bit in time. Latasha Harlins was killed shortly after Rodney King had his fateful encounter and beat down from the LA police. She was shot in the back of the head by a Korean shop owner who suspected her of shoplifting. The poem is titled, and Latasha was 15 at the time. The poem is titled No Safety in Numbers, for Latasha Harlins. Is it deflection, this impulse pulling me again to process her loss via numbers? Safer perhaps than inviting in images, blood-splashed backpack, scatter of snack cakes where she fell. I managed to push those back, keep calculating, even as the numbers misbehave. No balance, no logic, just jangled equations lined up in infinite deadly patterns. Her shattered skull. $2 clutched in a dead girl's fist. No solving a problem that starts 1 black girl plus 1 shopkeeper, divide by implicit bias, add 12 ounces of Tropicana. If a bullet costs just 50 cents, how can 15 years of dreams be worth just $1.79? So any questions about the second grouping or about the poems or the process?
Another question about the creative process. In the Tatiana poem, the line, grief now owns this kitchen, or grief owned the kitchen. Wow. Grief owned the kitchen now. How did you come up with that verb? Like what? It's perfect. I'm just wondering, like, did you start with something more pedestrian and
Possibly. Verbs are really important in writing. I'm doing a writing workshop at the Prospect Senior Center right now, and that's advice that I always give. Really look at your verbs. I don't know. Poems, like any other piece of writing, they do go through different revisions, right? So a lot of my poems I've been writing while out walking, starting the composition of the poems on my phone, and then sending them to myself and sitting down at the computer. Sometimes I write longhand, and when I do that, there's a lot of scribbling out and starting over. I'm not sure where that line came from in particular. I really appreciate you for latching onto that and remembering that line. That's really cool. Oh, one thing I wanted to say, the full series of 16 portraits will be displayed at the Woodbury Public Library in March, and I'll be doing some sort of a program. When I display the work, I also have printed out the people's stories, because I think those stories are so important. I had the opportunity to travel to Lima, Ohio, I guess 2 Octobers ago now, and display part of the series. I had finished 12 at that point, and a young couple who came to the gallery invited me into their recording studio. Wow. And we recorded my 6 poems that I had written at that time. So I have QR codes that I also display in the gallery, and you can scan them and hear the poem.